Warm welcome to the 62nd Rajagiri International Roundtable Conference. This is organized in association with CUSAT School of Legal Studies. First of all, let me thank Dr. Anish V. Pillai, Assistant Professor, a faculty member for getting some good panelists from across India for this event. In fact, this event was planned on March 11. Actually, the topic was re-internationalize Indian education. At that time, the topic, the plan was that. But unfortunately, we couldn't get ahead with the program because the state government had imposed a lockdown on 10th in all campuses, schools and colleges. So we had to postpone that program, and lockdown continued indefinitely, and so we couldn't take up that program. So now that we are really happy to have CUSAT as the host. Of course, the program title has changed. Title has changed because the new education policy was approved, and we see a lot of linking innovation with the new education policy. Now, we used to conduct this Rajagiri Roundtable across campuses in Kerala, in Ernakulam. And of course, it was not confined to any school or college. We had in different places, not in a particular school or college. We used to go from different places. And depending on the topic, we used to have a very good discussion. And the mode that we follow is basically a discussion kind of mode. It's an interactive mode. We'll have a panel of experts for each program, but we expect all the participants to be very active. And the deliberations of this program is normally published in detail in the Pallikudam magazine, which is brought out by the Rajagiri Media, and of course in the Pallikudam portal. It is also actively promoted across our online channels, that is the YouTube and social Facebook and all the other media. So we're coming to this lockdown situation. Rajagiri Media undertook so many activities. Actually, we had two major national awards, announced two major national awards, and one of the awards was already declared on August 15th. Another one is coming up soon. And to engage our parents and children during the lockdown, we had come out with a lot of very innovative ideas. We also launched an online school, Pallikudam online school. We also held competitions like Povitunes, where children of different age groups drew a lot of caricatures and pictures. So we are yet to announce the awards for that. And I'm happy to see a large gathering today from across the country. I'm thankful to the CUSAT School of Legal Studies, which is associating with us in this particular episode. And we have a very diverse talent. And the topic is also very relevant now, whether we should innovate or perish. Now, when we look at the independent India, we have gone through three major policies now. First one was in 1966. 1968, it was announced in 1968. Why it was required was that the Congress, the ruling party itself felt that there was a lot of problems with our education system. And Indira Gandhi was the prime minister at that point of time in 1964. And she constituted the Kothari Kothari Commission, which later became what you call a Bible for our kind of educational reforms in the country. Then after 20 years, actually that started the 10 plus 2 plus 3 system. So until then we had the 11 plus 1 plus 3 different systems. We had the 11 years of schooling plus 1 year intermediate. So a lot of other systems were in vogue. Then we started the 10 plus 2 plus 3 system. And this has gone until now. And after 20 years, there was a major policy change in the 1986 new education policy that was initiated by Indira Gandhi's son, Rajiv Gandhi. And The reason was that at that point of time, it was felt that our old education policy was itself becoming irrelevant or not up to that, what you call, changing trends that was happening at that point of time. But if you look at the, what you call, education policy of 1986, it was framed at a time when there was no ICT. There was no, what you call, internet connectivity. So all these 20 years, a lot of changes have again taken place. So now we have the third policy, which is in between there was a amendment to the 1986 policy in 1992, which was by the Narasimha Rao government. So basically, we have this, what do you call, team of people representing the schools, the higher education sector, to deliberate on what exactly is innovation. If you look at it, the concerns raised in the first policy, some of those concerns still remain now, because gross enrollment ratio is not rising as expected. Then learning outcomes are not really good. If you look at it, because so many surveys have shown that our learning outcome is for different age groups is very poor. So these are some of the challenges which are to be addressed in the new education policy. So the major concern for any policy is to innovate. If there is no innovation, then there is no requirement of a policy itself. So basically, we'll address 4 issues in this session. One is how innovative is NEP itself. What are the what you call ingredients, or what are the new features that add some newness to this policy, and which is in tune with the times. Then what is the concept of innovation as outlined in the whether that's the right strategy, all the concepts. Then of course the most important part, because the legal legal people are here, experts are here, how to look at the what you call legal aspects of this policy, whether it has to go for a parliamentary approval. Actually, a lot of criticism now is about whether this has been approved by Parliament, whether it should be approved by Parliament. And other thing is, so many new structures are being created in this policy. So many new structures, whether it is in higher education or so many regulatory things. Maybe old things are being replaced by new bodies and structures. So how to go about dismantling all these, whether this requires some kind of parliamentary approval for that. Then of course, the most important part is there should be a roadmap for implementing this policy. If you look at the 1968 policy, one of the major reasons why it was considered a failure was because there was no roadmap for that policy. Secondly, there was not much of a financial backing. So it took such a long time for some of the recommendations to be implemented. So this aspect is also very crucial, whether we have a roadmap lined up. As per the government estimate itself, it will take up to another 10, 15 or 20 years for the entire policy to be in place. So we'll have recommendations and suggestions. Basically, this Rajagiri roundtable, we discuss and deliberate, we try to synergize, and we try to bring some kind of recommendations which can be shared with the policymakers. We have done this before. In fact, last year we had 2 or 3 discussions on the national education policy when it was in the draft stage. One was on the school system, or how it will affect the schools, and secondly, it was about how the higher education system will be impacted by the policy. So now the policy is almost final. There is not going to be any more discussions on this. So the idea is how innovative is this, and let's take this discussion forward. And we have the
and an interesting introduction was given on this particular policy, and the concerns were actually very important as to what happens to this particular policy, and what is the legal mandate and ambit of this policy. How does it operate? Whether Parliament has to step in and put across the points. These are the concerns which were raised. Now, to my understanding, you see, policy has come after a long time, and we are talking about this policy once it has come up, right? So sometimes I feel that we only speak with a knee-jerk reaction, and that is what policy, that is what legislation happens like that, and that is what discussions on policy also happens like that. I've been told that this particular policy, I'm not an expert in this area of education policy. However, as a layman, or you can say as a professor, law, or if I see the things from a pragmatic lens, I look at it from a perspective that policy documents are always, directive. So that gives you a direction, basically, that what exactly we are looking at the education paraphernalia and how these things will move. Implementation part comes later, and there has always been a debate on whether the policy comes first or the law, and there is a chicken and egg situation. And I have analyzed this particular situation in the context of competition law and policy, because if you look at it, there is still no policy on competition law, though we have a law which is being implemented since last 10 years. So if we talk about education policy as such, I believe this particular document, which provides a quite detailed analysis and detailed structure of the education which is being visualized or envisioned. So I personally believe that looking at a legality of a policy document is maybe not a correct parameter, because in law you cannot examine these policy documents because they are not to be strictly implemented as they are written over there. That actually shows you the intent of the policy, that yes, these are the major areas on which the work will be carried out. And if you look at the major areas which has been touched upon, and if you look at them, you will find the policy focuses specifically on the lifelong learning skills, moving away from the rote learning, providing freedom to the students rather than cabining them into different structures, give them freedom to choose different areas of learning which they want to do. It talks about critical thinking. It talks about holistic inquiry-based, discovery-based, discussion-based, analysis-based learning rather than conceptual knowledge and understanding. And this, I believe, we have been focusing a lot, because in education system, one of the major challenges have been that we as teachers have been communicating knowledge to the students, which I believe is not important in the current scenario wherein the knowledge is available everywhere. However, yes, critical thinking becomes very important, because you need to educate the child that what is the right information and how to sift the right information from the knowledge portals. Because there are all kinds of informations. And I know right now we are shaping knowledge in a different way, because on a simple issue, you will have debates on both the sides. And now it is more so available if you are looking at social media. And the generation is confused actually that which way to go. So I believe critical thinking and understanding will enable our students to actually sift through this information and make their own judgments. So this is what is my understanding as far as this curriculum content is concerned. I believe there is a lot of focus on transforming assessment, and I believe that is one of the major focus of the national education policy, which talks about having a clear assessment methods rather than having only summative examinations. You assess the students. Wow. So because it is very important for them and for us to actually measure the understanding of the content which we are giving to the students, the analysis which we are teaching them, and that cannot happen in one summative assessment. It has to be progressive. So this is what is one important thing which has been brought up here. I see there is a lot of focus on flexibility of the curriculum. I have talked about that. One important element which has been touched upon is multilingualism and the power of language. So it is a focus that there has to be all languages. We are having plenty of languages in our country, and there's a lot of diversity. And it gives us a lot of, pride in that particular fact that we are having so many languages and so many cultural diversities, but still we are one. And that basically offers us a lot of opportunity. And data shows that there are a lot of languages which have died over a period. And it is very important to, lift these particular languages and protect them. So I believe this policy is a good, sign showing there where they want to put across there. And not only this, the policy is also conscious about the latest changes, contemporary subjects like artificial intelligence, design thinking, organic living, environmental education. These are the things which have been talked about in the policy document, and which I believe is a right direction which they are going ahead. One important thing which I also find in the policy is about attention to the gifted students. Now, see, we have been always focusing on the students who are weak. And if you see in our systems, we have always been focusing on a system wherein we will take examinations and earmark the lowest 20% students and try to find some learning mechanism for them and support them. I believe there is also a requirement to have separate treatment, or you can say separate mechanism to deal with the gifted students who are extra talented. They need to have a different kind of a way forward for them wherein they can engage themselves for additional learning. So I believe this is a very interesting area which has been talked about. Ultimately, if you look at this particular policy document, it talks about constitutional values, it talks about ethical values, and somewhere I believe it focuses on the understanding of our own culture. So if you see our education system, and I have looked at it from different perspectives, and I find that we have been too oriented towards West when we are talking about our education system. You pick up the educational books and this, we have actually neglected our own culture, our own societal values, our own ethical values. And I believe we have moved more towards the Western education parameters and systems, which I believe is an unfortunate thing, because I have visited a number of countries, and I find that when I go to China, I don't see a single person speaking English. And whosoever has to actually work in their places, they learn Chinese and they do that. When I go to France, I find nobody speaking other than the French. And that is how, unless we respect our own languages, unless we respect our own culture, nobody else is going to respect. So I believe this is a very, very important. I understand that there may be a debate which is, against this, saying that maybe whether we are talking about globalization of education or not. I personally believe that it has it has been a serious miss in our education system, wherein we have been focusing too much on this English education and this. Though I consider that we have to be knowing this as a language, but at the same time, we should not be completely absolvent of our own culture and own aspects. So maybe to some people, the paragraph which is there in National Education Policy, and I quote, would be a troublesome situation because of the present political scenario. But I am of a firm belief that this National Education Policy should be seen apart from the political gimmick, and there should be a serious discussion, an academic discussion on facts, on issues, rather than smudging it with a political lens. This is what would be my submission to the panel right now. So I will just quote this, wherein they are talking about value-based education will include the development of humanistic, ethical, constitutional, and universal human values of truth, righteousness, conduct, peace, love, non-violence, scientific temper, citizenship value, and also life skills lesson in service. And I firmly believe that service is a very important component. I find at present generation is lacking a lot. They don't have that particular service component or towards their elders, towards the society in which they work. And this is where the values are created. And we don't have to go, across to many places. And I also believe that education is not only the responsibility of the government or government policies. Education basically is responsibility of each one of us. If you see some part of this National Education Policy, it talks about value creation, and that gets created at our homes. We actually give sanskaras. That is what is very important. So that dimension also needs to be looked at, that education as a subject is not only the responsibility of the government to discharge, but also we as a society has to come up. Because when we are talking about community teaching, community learning, if we are saying there is a village, who is responsible if there are not good teachers in that particular village? How many of us will go to a government school and actually catch hold of a teacher who is, but unfortunately that particular teacher may be a relative of a village pradhan or somebody. So I believe there is a holistic thinking which is required on this by everyone, not only by the policymakers or the people for or against the government or us educationists. So with this, I will rest. I think I have spoken a lot, but point is very simple. This educational policy document should be taken, even if there are areas and concerns which you feel, which we may feel that yes, that needs an address. That can be addressed always, but it is as court says that it is not a legal document to be challenged in the court of law. You cannot do that. Parliament, yes, Parliament can always discuss, but we have seen how discussions happen in Parliament. I believe this national education policy should be read carefully by the parliamentarians. And if they want to give this value, ethics, and this aspects, they should first inculcate and emulate that in the Parliament floor, so that there is a lot of learning which happens to the people around. With this, I will stop here, Anish. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
thank you, Professor Vijay Kumar Singh. I think one of the major areas of concern in this policy is about the school education system. So the entire what you call structure is being revamped. We don't have the old 10+2+3 system, and instead of that, we have 5+3+3+4. Ultimately, the child spends almost the same years, maybe one extra year, but the structure is changed. So I would like, we have so many representatives from the school sector, and how do they view this changes for the early child care and education, ECCE, and also the higher levels, the different grades they have specified, and whether this policy, all the suggestions that are given in this policy, whether those can be implemented within a particular time frame. Please, anyone from the schools will be able to take up this question.
Good afternoon.
Could you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Were you calling someone from the schools to
Yes,
come in and talk?
yes.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Charu Maini, and I'm a principal at a school in Gurgaon in Haryana. So from Haryana, I'm joining you.
Very nice.
And I'm a principal at DAV school in Gurgaon. So talking about this new system that is coming about for instead of 10+2, that is 5+3+3+4. So the only thing that I was thinking was increase in 1 year, extra year that would come in, and it will talk about the financial implications on the parents that could come. Otherwise, if we talk about schools as it is right now, also we have similar kind of a system, because for us, we have a pre-nursery where the student enters the school at 2.5, but here they are talking about at 3. And then after that, we have LKG, which is 3.5, and then UKG, which is 4.5. And the child reaches class 1 at 5.5. So it is approximately the same. So not much of a difference, but yes, the kind of pedagogy that we would be following in hand-holding and kind of a Anganwadi that they talk about is a welcome thing. And that's what we are also doing, project-based, activity-based learning in these formative years, which is being talked of. I'm saying that this is happening at our schools, but yes, not in most, and especially when we are talking of India as a whole. So this is a system where, because they're talking about working mothers, etc. And I think it is good. Yes, we should have, and its school system, when they talk about more flexibility, the only apprehension that I was facing was that right now also CBSE does not talk of very highly watertight compartments of subjects, though at schools we do talk of science stream, commerce stream, or humanities, but otherwise CBSE does not say that. It says one language and 4 other subjects to clear class 12th. And similarly for class 10th, we have vocational education. The only thing is in implementation, as Sanjeev Kumar sir was also Vijay Kumar Singh sir was also talking about, that how we implement is to be seen, how the implementation comes along. Because vocational education, still we already have the skill subjects that are there, but how many students take it? We have to actually tell the parents that this is a good skill subject and you should take it. And even now it is, as I was reading through a document, it is only 5% of the whole Indian students, with all the Indian students put together, who opt for skill subjects, because the kind of mindset that the people have is that only those who are not able to do good in mathematics, science, social science well, they only take the skill subjects, isn't it? We tell the parent, your child is not doing well, he's a slow learner, or having some learning disabilities, why don't you give him some skill subjects? So this is the kind of mindset that is coming along, and we need to break that ice. And for this, a vertical needs to be created. It's not only telling the schools that you should take up vocational education. A complete vertical needs to be created, where the parent also knows, and the principal and the teachers know, that if the child goes from this, has chosen, let's say, financial literacy as a skill subject in this thing, or beauty, and there's some skill subject like this in class 9th and 10th, beauty and wellness, something. So how does the child take it further, and what are the avenues at higher education? Can the child who has taken a beauty and wellness as one of the skill subject in class 9 take it further to class to higher education and do really well? It's not a just simple becoming a beautician at a particular parlor, but doing something good. So this was one thing. And I do not know whether I have addressed what was being expected of me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, ma'am, for this remarks. The basic concern for the school system, I think, is that it has made a very drastic change. For example, small schools will have to be connected to a larger complex, school complex. So does it mean that all the decentralized form of learning that we have been following, where we have small schools, medium-sized schools, big schools, that is going to go away? And even in the case of higher education, they are talking about large universities, maybe having one higher education institution in one district. So is it that the large size matters now, not the small one, or small
No,
or the medium size?
so what I feel is that for schools especially, it's not right. Even now we have schools which are just catering to pre-primary, and after doing pre-primary, the child comes to us. And then the schools have their own ways of assessing the child to take them and all. So that can do that.
Yeah,
can still be there, because these pre-primary schools, sorry sir, I'll just complete my sentence. For the pre-primary schools, it has to be more closer to the home, isn't it? The mother leaves the child in the complex and goes for work and then comes back, because that kind of a thing, it will still stay. I don't think there is much of a problem, and the students can still be taken up in a higher in a school which caters to secondary. And similarly for higher education, I was just thinking, like right now we have schools like where colleges which cater to only let's say engineering or law. But even then, good colleges like the universities, IITs, etc., they do have sociology, economics, history as their subjects which add on. The students can take them as what you say, add-on subjects. So, but they are talking about that it has to be a comprehensive university, not only one catering to only engineering, where the children are only studying engineering. That's what is my understanding. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think thank you for that particular comment and the question as well. But I believe it is a narrow interpretation of the word when we say school complexes or larger universities. It nowhere says that it will be limited to that. In fact, idea is that these smaller schools are not having that particular wherewithal to learn more, because the bigger schools will have more best practices which can inculcate into these smaller schools. So idea is basically that integration. See, for example, if there is a larger university in a district, that particular university will have best of the facilities and the teachers. And these particular people can always help towards capacity building of the smaller institutions or smaller colleges, which we are talking about. I believe the intention of the policy flows from there, rather than you're dismantling the smaller schools and making them big, or maybe merging everybody. Everybody is not the idea.
Okay, thanks, Vijay Kumar Singh, Dr. Vijay Kumar Singh. It's another concern which about innovation, I have expressed this. Innovation often gets to be what you call mixed with technology, or it is seen to be synonymous with technology. I think in several areas in this document, you can find the use of gaming apps, even in language learning. So ultimately, there is when this Corona crisis, COVID crisis came, we all saw that many people couldn't access the online learning because they didn't even have the TV set. So when a policy thinks of what you call innovation in terms of technology, isn't it a very dangerous way to look at innovation? I think who will be able to take up this question?
I am Jeeva Niriyal from Sri Lanka.
Okay.
I was invited by Dr. Anish Pillai to give some sort of, my thoughts at an international person who are engaged in the academic arena to discuss about the policy. But some of the questions I got, that 4 questions, but these are not indicated in innovation. But taking the experience that we are also reviewing the other policy which we are having, and after this Corona, the issue, as well as that we are having, the new government, it is a, decision has been taken to review the existing policy, which you have the consideration of the innovative, the means and mechanism, how we have to do it. So since, therefore, I would like to take that also into my consideration, and to see that the policy as the first presenter, I would like to actually agree with the first presenter. I'm so sorry, I'm unable to, keep in mind who are the names and all. So requesting pardon on that. He's very correctly pointed out, yes, innovation is there and it is very really needed. And now see that we are now in the 21st century talking about the knowledge-based era. So then the knowledge-based era means we are, giving the, stopping the full stop to the industrial-based the era. So then knowledge is the most important thing. That the knowledge also, we do not consider that as the very traditional knowledge. It's an innovative knowledge, which is, the collectively share that, to push the people to change. That is what I really, being as an academic, but I see going by a lot of the definition given for the knowledge. So then, therefore, definitely it is included, should be included the new technology. So then the question was asked that whether it is a dangerous situation to include that. I don't think that it is dangerous, but if you purely based on the technology, then we are like, the prisoners of that. Therefore, my suggestion is, I think the policy gave you liberty to have then the pedagogical, we say that, the blended learning system where you have to incorporate the new technology plus the traditional way of on-site class. Because that last year I had the opportunity to go to India, and there is the Asian Alliance of Universities. My university, the Colombo University, took the presidentship in the last year. So it was, the whole point is whether we are going for totally online. So then the Tata Institute University also came, and many were supported for that fully online. But I said that my concerns, no, not fully online. That means, that the technology used, we depend on the technology. No, it is not the case. But to my understanding, I know whether I differently read it. The policy gave you the opportunity. There are some pros and cons, but if you take the policy at a large scale, it's a very good one, focusing on how we have to develop our the system. It is taking the school and the higher education and the professional and the vocational. The education, and taking that, how you have to include the systems, the thinking, and all the new technology, but while including and maintaining the traditional the learning methods. So I see that the policy did not specifically say that to fully convert into the technology, but use the technology, because we can't go without now technology. Therefore, then only thing is, I did not see that where you have to regularize that, where you have to put the benchmarks, that the ceiling level, the bottom level, how you have to utilize that, as the presenter said, that the implementation, that is, I did not see that. But when you implement that, we can see how could we can best include that. Therefore, my answer to your question is yes. The policy talks about the technology, but the policy does not say that should be based only on the technology, but we have to use, the blended learning system, where at the tertiary level, the third, here, according to the policy, it says that the higher education, now we are having master classes, smart classes, and where you incorporate the new techniques, because we are in the technological world. So then a little bit I want to add to that. We also found, and we also struggle, there are some places the students, they are unable to engage in this type of the new technology. So then the policy at the government level should have to have a mechanism to make sure that how the support system is provided to that type of students. So therefore, the simple answer, my answer is that I hope that I answer for your question.
Yeah, we'll. I think I'll give some more time for the school education, innovations required in school education. And we have somebody called Father Loyola Anthony from Nagaland. Actually, he won the first ever Pallikudam, his school called Christopher School, won the first ever Pallikudam National Award for Innovation. So it's in a rural area which is cut off from capital city of Kohima. And they have done some very wonderful things in this lockdown period. Maybe he will be the right person to talk about this involving innovation without technology, how it is possible.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Srikumar Raghavan. Thank you for inviting me to speak about this. Actually, everything came all of a sudden during this COVID-19 crisis. We were all, in a way, sincerely worried about the future of our children, who are entrusted to our care. And we are in a situation where, in a place where it is really very, very far from the actual developed areas, almost a 10 hours journey from the capital, no much of facilities. And what we came across was that we gave lots of importance to home-based activities at home. So initially, children were not able to do anything. However, when they were given lots of home-based activities, they began to keep themselves very, very busy. Earlier, they were going to the field, paddy field with their parents because they had lots of time at home. They had nothing to do. Even when we began to provide some notes through WhatsApp, they were not so much enthused by that because it is not, they are not so used to it. And most of the parents don't have that facility. And therefore, we innovated this new idea of providing all the activities to be done at home. And that worked quite positive. And even now, till now, the children are very quite busy. And they are trying to fulfill all those. Basically, that's what we do in the schools. We bring them to the school and give them lots of literary as well as talent competitions. So we thought, why don't we give that same platform at home? And the parents also liked it because the parents could see their children are involved in many activities in front of them. And the children are also happy. Children are happy that they are able to demonstrate all their capacities and their creativity in front of their parents. So there was lots of involvement between the parents and the students, which was not the usual custom in our place. And all these years, last 5 years, we have been trying our best to let the parents involve in the studies of their children. And it was not working out with all these structure-oriented schools. You might have seen in our video, the literal structure of our school, just made of bamboo walls. And we couldn't make the parents to get involved in the daily activities, and especially these literary and the talent competitions of the children. But now, when the children were started doing things at home, and parents got interested. And so as we introduced so many items in the schools, in their own homes, like writing a moral story. So the children learn morality by writing that, and writing a folk story. You know, these days we all talk about children losing in touch with their tradition, their values that is inherent in their tradition. And here the child learns the folk story from their elders sitting at their feet. They listen and they put it in writing. And later they also try to speak that one in front of a video, maybe a camera. They learn a lot of things are taking place, values are taking place, and their writing quality is improving and their speaking quality is improving. And likewise, almost 28 home-based activities we introduced. And there we haven't used any of the modern means of communication as such. Of course, as Madam Nirilla Jiva from Sri Lanka was talking about, blending both the modern means of communication, the modern media, as well as the traditional. And we tried both, and it worked out. And therefore, at the same time, we are so happy that the National Education Policy 2020 is giving us lots of avenues for flexibility. And we are so hopeful that we can very well blend our modern means of communication as well as our traditional way of teaching our children. And I feel that we need to give more importance to our tradition. Not, of course, not limiting, not minimizing our technology, which is so much needed. And in fact, we got all these ideas through technology. We can make use of that, but not depending wholly on that. And it has been so successful, and children are so happy, and they are learning here every day. They come to the school to come to submit their assignments or their creativity, and they're so happy. We could see them so happy to come and submit. And it is taking place without any use of modern means of communication in this small, faraway village with no much of facilities, and we have been effective in that. And we are happy that at this right time, that during this COVID-19 crisis, this national education policy has come. It is a real wake-up call for each one of us to be more innovative. And I would like to state that if we are sincerely interested in the growth of our children, entrusted to our care, no matter whatever the policy may be, we can make use of that, any platform, to give a quality education to our children and better prepare them for the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Father Loyola Anthony, for those very inspiring story from Nagaland. Actually, this gives us some kind of hope that even without a policy, a lot of things can be done at regional, local levels. We don't need to be told by somebody to do something innovative. Is there anybody in the panel who would like to respond to this story and how this innovation can be done without much technology? I think Dr. Job Kuruvilla would be able to. Dr. Job Kuruvilla.
Okay.
Can you hear?
No, I can hear. No, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
See, generally speaking, what Father Anthony has said is, gives a lot of hope. And as he has rightly said, technology is not the major factor, but the sincerity of the people who are involved in education and their sense of direction. The objectives are clear. Whether technology is there or not, I think we can achieve the end. And I had visited Assam in connection with a school program. And there I could see, even very near to Guwahati, the pathetic situation in which even government schools were functioning. And the teachers, they were trying their best, but then they were not able to come out of this kind of situation created by the many factors. But before that, let me come back to the educational policy as such. See, it's very good that after a long gap, we are getting a policy where some kind of directions are being laid out. And the flexibility and also the choice given to the students to select their subjects at a higher level, all these things are to be appreciated. But do you expect the educational policy of a country like ours to come without this kind of so-called innovative changes? It has got to come because the policy was prepared by experts, and naturally a lot of things have been considered and it has been laid out. The problem in India is something different. I think Dr. Vijay Kumar was telling about his experience in Germany or France and all that. See, so far as our country is concerned, we are much more than even Europe put together. Our culture, they say we should be proud of, but then it is a multicultural, and then we are trying to somehow synchronize it, try to find the common factors so that the nation can move on. Now, if English language is to be viewed in a way that as if it is, bifurcating or giving separate, dividing feelings among the students or the population, I don't think that is a good way of seeing national unity. Because if you allow one language to come over and then say that this is our national culture, and then I accept that. I'm not mentioning the particular language. It cannot be a unifying factor. Rather, it will only divide. And as you rightly said, language is a very important thing. But we have got to make certain compromises, because as a nation, we have to keep up our diversity and at the same time progress. So education also, if we forget this importance, that is our diversity in many things, even culture. People are talking about unification of culture. If somebody attempts that, the nation will be split. So if education is used as a kind of tool to even distort history or change history, I think that will be a very big mistake that our people will be doing. As educationists, the policy has been excellent, I would say, even including the lower, even kindergarten and all that into a formal system is extremely good. But then in India, what's happening is we are basically a poor country, even though we would like to claim that, we are at the forefront and all that. Lack of funds is an extremely important deterrence for us to progress. And while appreciating the policy intentions, I think the educationists in India, they should also take into consideration as a nation what is happening in the overall picture. In India, even without this policy, there has been a trend to shift the responsibilities of education from the government to the private. And many people have started appreciating that, because, private sector contributing for education will make a lot of progress in this field. That is what they assume. And this education policy also is being marketed like Horlicks, in the sense that the positive things, like they will say it contains 80% carbohydrate. But when we dig into that, we will find that this carbohydrate is nothing but plain table sugar. So the marketing has been done extremely well. But the elephant in the room, which some of us refuse to see, is that the whole educational field will be now pushed into the private hands. And I have worked in private also, and I have seen how some of the universities at the higher education and some of the colleges, how they are functioning. Education for almost 80% of the population, it has been highly commercialized. The middle class or the poor people cannot afford this kind of education. So what has happened is, in India, slowly a shift is happening, a tectonic shift is happening, that the education will become a monopoly of those who can afford. A very dangerous trend. And all the jobs are very less in the country, and all the jobs will be pocketed, snatched by this privileged group. So unless people see this, the danger involved in this, of course, the government can save a lot of money. They need not spend 6% of the GDP and all that. Universities will do that. Another advantage is we can always say that our enrollment rate ratio has gone up. So statistically, we stand in a very good sense. We can say that country's total population now, we are 130 crores. And the poor people may be at least 30 crores. So we can deprive them quality education and then still maintain a good education for other sector. And still we say that we have progressed, because if you're progressing from 20 to 25%, that's a progress. I think while uploading the theories behind the policies which has been framed, because my friend was talking about critical thinking, creative thinking, all these kind of things, wonderful things. I have been going around the colleges, both private and in some government, and then talking about Ernst Bloom's taxonomy and all these kind of blended learning. all kinds of jargons we use in education. And finally, I find that it is honored only from the inspection team is coming. Even in the private sector, I am telling, which we highly praise. And the idea that the shift should be from the summative to the formative stage, excellent. But so long as we have got an examination system which is based on the summative thing, I think that also they can change. But I tell you what is the danger. In theory, it looks very attractive, you know, that the teachers who are teaching will be making the assessment. I have visited quite a few autonomous colleges in Tamil Nadu and in Andhra. Kerala, I am leaving because we somehow feel that, you know, our education system is excellent. So there, a lot of colleges have been given autonomy. And what I find is the teachers who are supposed to keep ethical values, they will see to it that they get almost 99 to 100%. They will coach the students about the answers. So the so-called formative evaluation is done. So theoretically, everything is fine, you know, formative evaluation, and the teachers keep their jobs because they are getting excellent results. But the students who are coming out of this kind of autonomous system, they are as good or as bad as those who are coming from the traditional system. So what we need is a kind of reorientation. We should not shy of spending money for our people. Education and health are the two pillars on which a society can be built up. Cultural unity or whatever we are calling of. The nation will be united only if these two things are there. So we should not hesitate to spend money on that. Rather than pushing this responsibility to the so-called private sector. And in India, unfortunately, the private sector education, whatever so far has been grabbed, is by three groups of people. One is the business people, industrialists. Second is the religious leaders. They also have got a lot of money. And the third is politicians. There is a particular state in India where most of the professional colleges are being grabbed under political leaders. Where is education for them, other than making money? So I'm just stopping my comment on this. So what I would request the panelists, if we examine the theoretical part of that, it is excellent, pedagogical part of it, epistemology part of it, knowledge, you know, how it should be acquired, all that, wonderful. So the document is a kind of view for people to move away from criticism. Why somebody was talking even about the parliament, that is, parliament is not fit enough to discuss. Are we fit to discuss this? So if you don't have faith in a democracy, if you don't have a faith in parliament, and then say that our parliament is not fit to discuss educational policies, pity. It's such an important thing affecting millions of billions of people, so that it should be opened for open discussion. We should not offer education to private sector like what we are offering the industries. Education should not be business, should not be made as a kind of business model to make money. If this is not taken care of, this policy, in spite of the sugar-coated good intentions, will lead to calamity to the nation. This is all what I want to say.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Jyoth Kuruvilla. He is a leading academician and he was a former principal of a leading engineering college in Cochin. Father George Punchail, CMI, has requested to talk. We are now handing over for his views.
So good afternoon, sir. And lots of discussion on the education policy. Most of the things depends on the decision of the state governments. And if the state government is not supporting and making a suitable decision, whatever may be the policy that will not be implemented. Already 4 states have requested the government to have an open discussion in the parliament. For example, take the example of Kerala, where we have lots of Anganwadis, the preliminary stage. And some of the schools have a pre-KGs, but most of the schools doesn't have it. So whether we retain it, whether we are able to train those who are in Anganwadis and raise the quality of their teaching, it's a decision, the policy decision that the government has to take. Secondly, I just wanted to talk about the skill development, which is very important, very crucial at this stage. Someone has sent a message that what is the use of skill development actually. And actually the implementation part, we have lots of freedom. And the pedagogical leaders have lots of opportunity to implement the critical thinking as well as the skill development programs in the campus. Because actually the skill development program will be more beneficial for the students, just like our academic programs. It should be closely related with academic programs. So these are the 2 points I just wanted to make it. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, there is one question from Josie Workey. What is the scope for skill development in new NEP? I think there is already emphasis on this, what do you call, vocational training from school onwards, 8th grade onwards. Then vocational training is also given importance in the higher education. Would anybody in the higher education sector would like to take a call on this issue? Professor Poduval is there? Professor Poduval, could you unmute your mic?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Now, I'm here to listen to others. I don't want to speak much on the subject. However, a few points. Number one, we are discussing the national policy. The term policy implies a statement on the desirable future. What should be the future? Rather than a discussion on what is the present state of affairs. And when we talk about desirability of the future, one aspect of it is the necessary control that we have to exercise on the education. Because there is a lot of politics in education. There's a lot of politics in knowledge. And the negative side of education, negative side of knowledge is very dangerous to the society. For instance, any information, is it a knowledge? We expect knowledge to be authentic, data-based, objective. And if somebody expresses certain opinions against the interest of some other group, that will be dangerous for the knowledge part. The prejudices that we often express should be stopped. So one aspect of the policy is how to control the negative side of the educational aspect or the knowledge part. To my mind, the most important aspect of the policy is statement of objectives. And somebody mentioned that our culture, the Indian culture or the local culture should not be lost in the process of education. Or rather, there is nothing wrong in the statement. But at the same time, the objective of education is to make everyone a world citizen. That means an international outlook, an objective view. And we had to look at this national policy on education from this perspective. And we should not lose sight of many things by focusing on specifics at specific level. So my focus is on the macro level as question. And on this issue on skill development, I have one more point to speak. The moment we hear skill, people often think only about skills associated with the jobs, which is not correct. The skill that we are emphasizing in education is not job skills. It should be more on or skill development.
Professor Puduwal, you are not audible right now.
I think there is a network issue.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Fatuma Kuti Nooran, would you like to comment on this issue that we have discussed?
Okay.
Can you hear?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Especially the dignitaries, the educationists. I was listening to each one of you. What all things you shared, that is correct. As when we talk about innovation, the first thing that comes to our mind is it is technology, especially nowadays. I think if we can make a formula, innovation is equal to noble thoughts, wonderful ideas, and focused actions. Then if we can apply that in our schools during their formative years, to a certain extent, we can move forward. And another thing, what I would like to say is what that Professor Puduwal was saying, I think. In order to thinking about, for example, state-wise or nation-wise, we have to go for a broad-based education. That is, we have to think global, and we have to instill among the students to think global and to cross the border of the nation. And our idea of Vasudhaiva Kudumbaga, the whole world is one family. That is the core value we have to instill among the students. Then I was very much impressed by that Father Loyola and then his home-based activities. Naturally, those who are attending such type of things, they will be smart and they will do that automatically, they will achieve that skill. Then when we think about global perspective, so we have to teach our students, or we have to impart to them the global values, that is respect, responsibility, and integrity. techniques and technology are very important, but adding trust to that, that is the issue of the decade, especially during these pandemic days. This is what I want to share.
Yeah,
Thank you for giving me an opportunity, especially being with these highly respected dignitaries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Patamaguti Nuran, for this remarks. Actually, we have come halfway. There is this issue of higher education also to be addressed, and we have a very very eminent team from the higher education sector. So there are so many problems identified in the higher education sector also, where again this question of innovation, how you can innovate with the pedagogy or the curriculum, or a lot of things can be done. So basically, I find that our system was very much outmoded, and the one thing which is stressed all over the place in this document is the multidisciplinary learning. So that is going to be a game changer because we still have now had a compartmentalized kind of learning. Now everything is going that global way. Now just Patamaguti also talked about this globalization. In the policy document also it is said that there will be Indian universities will be urged to go abroad. Like we have mining companies and exploration companies going abroad. Our education, our universities will be urged to set up campuses abroad. Likewise, some of the best campuses will be allowed to come to India. So how do you see this development? One is that our whole higher education sector is going to change. There are new structures going to come in. One is that HTCI, Higher Education Council of India, with 4 verticals. So a lot of changes. I think Dr. Anish V. Pillai should be able to take this a little bit forward with a very powerful punch going forward with this discussion.
Sir, we have with us Dr. Kaumudi Challa. I think she will be the apt person for discussing this issue. So we should give chance to her, chance to madam.
Yeah. Welcome, Kaumudi Challa, Dr. Kaumudi Challa.
Very good afternoon to everyone. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Very good afternoon to everyone. I'm very happy, and it's a matter of privilege for me to present my views on the National Education Policy 2020 in the 62nd Rajagiri International Roundtable Conference in association with CUSAT University. The title of this particular presentation or discussion is also very apt for the present situation. It says, innovate or perish, a decisive policy in the life of the nation. So it's really very apt because either we have to innovate now, we have to make the changes which are there, or we will be perishing. So at this juncture, I am reminded of one particular proverb which says that education is the passport to the future. For tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. So today is the right time that we have to prepare. We have to think about our entirely the education system which is there. So in this particular context, the National Education Policy 2020, I can say it has come at a very correct time or at an apt time. It is high time that the country needs to focus on education because till now, if we see, education has been given the utmost importance in our country. In fact, always it has been stated that education is a virtue. Education is something which will help to improve the life of the individuals, and it is considered as a fundamental human right. But at the same time, if we see, the people who are teaching, they have also been given the utmost importance in our country. In fact, it is stated like Guru is given the utmost significance or utmost importance. But over a period of time, if we see, maybe because of so much of invaders who came to India and also because of the British rule which was there, so many changes which have taken place in the political, cultural, social situation which is there in the country, that there has been a change even in our education system. But at the same time, the constitution framers, they have also tried to include the right to education. And today, if we see in Article 21A, we are having the right to education, which is considered as a part of the fundamental rights, and it is considered as one of the basic rights and a part of right to life. Even at international uh, context, if we see, there are so many numerous international documents and declarations which are emphasizing on the right to education. So education is considered as one of the fundamental human rights, and it is essential for the exercise of all the other human rights which are there. Now, this national education policy, I would like to highlight mainly with respect to the legal field which is there. So some of the salient features which are there, which the National Education Policy 2020 aims forward is, it is one of the first education policy we can say, which has addressed most of the developmental concerns which are there, or most of the developmental issues which are there. It takes into consideration that at the time the country is facing the situation which is there, it may lead to that there is a need for improving the skill which is there of the students, the teaching as well as the learning abilities which are there of the teacher as well as the student. Then one factor which this policy is emphasizing is with respect to our cultural ethos and tradition. So it says education and ethics, it is of great importance for the public purpose. It is very much essential for discipline, for practice, and it emphasizes on critical thinking and interdisciplinary research and innovation. Now, I would like to highlight with respect to the implications for the law. So if we see, like since Sir had prior asked about the higher education. So if we are talking about the law and the legal field, we will see that some aspects which are there, they have already been imbibed and they are already included, which is there in our system. But then as we are trying to proceed further and as we are trying to develop, because one of the objectives which the National Education Policy stated is that it wants India to be a developed nation and also one among the three economies which are there. So we have to analyze it from that particular situation, that whether the national education policy is adequate enough to take into within its ambit each and every field which is there. And since I'm from the law field, or I'm teaching the law subject which is there, so naturally much of the interest would arise that how far this policy is going to affect the legal field, how far it is going to affect the law students which are there. Now, one of the aspects which this particular policy talks about is developing the creative potential which is there of each individual. So it says that education is not to focus only on the cognitive capacities which are there, both foundational capacities of literacy, numeracy which is there, but also on the social, ethical, emotional capacities which are there and the dispositions which are there. Now here I would like to highlight that in the legal field already, when we are teaching the law subjects, law is a multidisciplinary subject. It is already very clear and it is established now that law can never be studied in isolation. In fact, we go to the extent of saying that a mere lawyer would be like a block, just a block of wood. So a lawyer today has to know about economics. A lawyer today has to know about political science, sociology, and that is the reason why all these three subjects, they are being taught to the law student. So law is already, we can say, interrelated with so many other fields which are there. But then in the changing context which is there, or in the changing situation which is happening in the country, how far we are able to realize this? That is the moot question here. Then another point which this policy highlights is it emphasizes on the rich heritage which is there of the country. When I read the policy, I found that there are names mentioned like Gargi, Maitreyi. Okay, then every field, if you see, right from medicine, then with respect to the architecture, okay, each and every field, if you see, India has had great names who are there and people who have contributed to these fields, even astronomy. Okay, so each and every field, if we see, there have been the philosophers, there have been the scientists who have been born in India and they have contributed. So what we have to develop, so why this policy is a bit different from other policies, I feel, is because it emphasizes on our rich culture, on our rich tradition which is there. Even in our Indian constitution also, if we see, this particular aspect is there. Like be it environmental law or be it with respect to medicine, we see always we have given the highest priority which is there with respect to life, that life is very sacred. Then each and every living organism, every species, it has to be protected. Now, in the field of law, why it will become important is because law is interrelated with the other subjects. Then one more point which the policy highlights is about the interrelation with technology. Now, today, if we see, technology is, it has invaded, it has permeated each and every aspect of our life. So today we see that every aspect which is there, the technology has become very, very important. So be it with respect to the food, be it with respect to genetic engineering, be it the biotechnological innovations which are taking place, or even with respect to computer. Like one simplest example right now, which I can point out is that even though the pandemic is there, many places are closed and the people are afraid to go outside, but still we are able to carry out this discussion. So that is only because of the innovation, and that is only because of the technology. But then again, I feel that there would be some what we can say, not drawbacks, I would say, but then there are certain aspects which this policy would need to consider. So first is because the technological aspects, they are so relevant today, but whether in our country where we are having such a huge population, and still the basic needs which are there of food, clothing, shelter, they are yet to be satisfied. Okay, they are yet to be met with. And then every day we see there are so many numerous problems which are still coming up. Whether we would be able to provide this technological innovations which are there, or the benefits of technology which are there, whether we will be able to provide it to each and every individual and to each and every student. That is one question. Then second, some of the subjects are such that completely you cannot depend only upon the technology. For example, if I say law, you cannot sit in the library and study it. Even the realistic school, what it says, that to study law, to understand law, you need to go outside, you need to go to the courts, you need to meet the people, you need to see in action what is happening. Then only you'll be able to understand the application of the law and how and why the law is to be interpreted in a particular manner. Same manner, if I say, even when you talk about the other subjects like architecture, engineering, these are the subjects which would be having more the dimensions which are related this policy, one point which I feel is it is totally or completely it is emphasizing with respect to the technological aspects. So how far we would be able to provide technology to each and every student, that is one. Then recently there have been reports that more than 27% of the students, they are still not having the access to the laptops. Many areas, the remote area where they do not have the networks which are there, then how these students would be able to complete their classes. Then as I told you, there are certain subjects where you just cannot sit and study, but those are the subjects where you have to go out into the field, you have to interact with the people. So if it is engineering or if it is architecture, okay, even medicine involves you cannot sit in the library or sit in the laboratory and study it. Okay, so to prepare a doctor, you need to give a training to them, and that training will be only if they are able to go out into the field, they are able to interact with the people which is there. Same manner, if I talk about law is highly multidisciplinary, and it is totally, we can say, it is having an interface with the society. Each and every factor which happens in the society is going to have an impact upon the law, and everything which is happening in the legal system would have an impact on the society. So what I feel is that the national education policy, though it is laudable, though it has highlighted on very good aspects, it emphasizes on culture, it emphasizes on tradition, it emphasizes on multidisciplinary study, which is really the need of the hour. Because if we see many of the subjects, you see they are so interrelated, and therefore the student should not be kept isolated. In fact, the student has to understand that how the different subjects are interrelated. Then only the research will be developing, then only we can have the innovations which are there. So these are all the good points which I feel, or the highlights which are there. But then there are certain aspects which makes it vulnerable, like one, in a developing country like ours, though we are trying to become a developed country and one among the 3 economies which are there of the entire world, but still whether we would be able to provide this technology to each and every student. Then second, the policy also talks about improving the nourishment with respect to the students, providing them with proper breakfast, meals which are there, so that they are able to devote their time to the studies and they are able to concentrate properly on the study. Now, again, this is a problem because then you need to take care of certain other aspects which are there, like the midday meal scheme, which was started way back. But how far was it successful? This was due to the various, we can see that various like corruption or various problems which were there in the implementation of the midday meal scheme, which is there, or everything which becomes a political issue. So again, these aspects, they should not hinder with the application or with the implementation of the national education policy. So the policy should also devote and see that it is more practical, because emphasizing on the culture and the tradition, that is the need of the hour. At the same time, we need to take care that the technological aspects would be able to reach out to each and every student. Then certain subjects which are there, like law, engineering, medicine, they are more interdisciplinary and more interaction would be required among the students and with the society. So with this, I would like to close, or I would like to end my viewpoints. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, ma'am, for those very inspiring and very insightful message that you had to give, because this is a major point that this multidisciplinary learning is emphasized, then the Indian cultural ethos and values are emphasized, and technology concerns are all, of course, there. But in between, we had shown one slide. The HRD minister has invited the school teachers and principals to up to 12th standard, all the teachers and educational leaders to actually log into a particular site that it was given there. If you want, we can show it again also. Until August 31st, you can give your suggestions on how to implement this policy, because this decision has already been taken to implement it. So how to go about it? All these suggestions from the teachers and principals, they can share it here. And I would quickly like to go to Brigadier Nair, who I think wants to convey some thoughts on this issues that we have discussed.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. At least some may be thinking that what is an army man doing in an educational panel discussion. But to let you know, my association with Rajgiri Media and this roundtable dates back to 2014. I've started, participating in this and giving ideas. And I've been contributing to our magazine Pallikudam for quite long. My association in my long career in the army in part of education is that I was the chairman of the management bodies of about 3 schools for about 3-4 years in different terms. And after retirement, coming to Kerala, I've been involved in last about 5 academic years in the giving, mentoring and other things to my school students, and we look after the infrastructure of the school. So that's my background. As far as India is concerned, we has been the repository of knowledge and fountain of knowledge since about 5,000 years back. From education background, our universities, Nalanda and Takshila, have been very much sought after in the past, as we know it. And it continued also. And Mr. Macaulay said that, we have to re-educate Indians to bring them into their way of life, or to colonialize India. So education means actually is the acquisition or imparting of knowledge and skills. And it has got the societal relationship with it. If it had been my family and myself only, the connotation is a different one. But if you have to live in a society, with education, the knowledge and skills required are different. And this is given a spin by science and technology. And with advent of time and the passage of time, you learn more technology comes in. So there are spin-offs as far as the pedagogy is concerned, or what are the subjects to be taught or learned. We're talking about current policy existing. It's not that we never had a policy. Actually, right from the beginning, as there has been a policy, there has been a practice of learning and teaching. As far as Kerala is concerned, we all will remember the Eduthaashan used to teach you your alphabet, Malayalam alphabets. Then in 60s and 70s, it used to be that until about class 5, your education is in Malayalam. And it is in class 5 you started learning the alphabets, English alphabets. And in class 6, the Hindi teaching started. So therefore, now we are going back. So there was a requirement of a course correction of the policy, education policy, which we have been following. That's what the aim of this new national education policy 2020 is to give course correction to what is existing. So as far as innovation is concerned, we are, I think, carrying it a little too far. Innovation means that bringing in new ideas. That's it. Technology, ideas which are too new, because we have to adaptate your policy and your systems as far as what is the latest available. So therefore, we have to imbibe the scientific temper, scientific technology, and as far as pedagogical things are concerned, we can adapt so many procedures. What is available? That's what is to be imbibed into our curriculum and in the way of teaching and all that. What is the national policy is looking at? Very correctly being done is that the policy is to be laid out at the top, and the execution will be at the state level, because as far as we know, what Nagaland, which we just heard about, is different, has a different culture, it has a different background. Their social milieu is different. Kerala, it is different. Punjab, it is different. Rajasthan is different. Tamil Nadu, it is different. So everybody got on. We got to adopt, keep the goals of education in the center, and to develop your other things, put together the things which is good, which is adaptable, which is feasible as far as the state is concerned. So that's what we are looking at. The important aspects which came to my mind are that the going back into learning in mother tongue, because it is the best understood language. If a boy or a girl of 3 to 6 years is learning, is hearing and understanding in Malayalam, unless very 0.001% of family really speak in English. So therefore, for understanding anything new, the easiest language is the mother tongue. So we are going back to mother tongue. And I've just in the beginning said that in my time, we had the medium of language Malayalam only. Only in about 1670, one division used to be started having English. Then, every family with the nuclear families coming, the parents wanted their child to learn through English, because that has become, that a notion has been there, because only through English is the only savior and they will do better. But that is not so. I'll come to another thing, the main aspect, mother tongue. Second is primary education now is being formalized, and the vocational content, which is very important, which I'll say that is a major problem as far as India is concerned. Our parents are ready to take their child right from class 1 to PhD. It's not the same as far as the foreign countries are required. There they will teach them up to school. After that, it's up to the boy or the girl. You go to a job, earn, and then you fund your further studies. But in India, it is different. Our family connections are different, and we are very strong. That is as the good part, and also not so good part also, as far as the independence of personalities or persons are concerned. Then coming to, there was a question of how are you going to exploit the demographic dividend? Everybody know that about 65% of our population is going to be about 35 years and below. So we have a young population. If they are suitably skilled and employed, I mean, skilling, I am of the way that the social skill, learning of social skills is important. That will happen when they come to school, they live in campus, and interact with friends and all that. That social skilling, that is a subject by itself. But as far as skilling in pedagogy is concerned, I feel it is as far as the employment is concerned. See, it is the run of the mill learning which has been going on for so long as far as India is concerned. It just goes to the college, school, complete school, go to college, go to post-graduation or go to engineering college. And the sad part is that they say that majority of our engineering graduates are unemployable. It's a very sad state. So it is not the run-of-the-mill education which is required. And I also feel that every individual is unique. So he have its own capabilities. So these capabilities of a person has to be identified in the school itself. And if some vocational things are good for him, go for that. If he's got a higher potential for higher learning, should go for that. And here there is a little realistic assessment of your child required from the parent side, which I hope it will come. Along with it, dignity of labor is also to come. The society will have to change, which may not happen easily. But I do understand that in my younger days, the youth from the upper caste never used to work because it was against their status. But over the last about 30 or years, I have seen that people are migrating. They are realistic and they have taken up any job. For skilling, as per their potential is very important, which is a major parameter as per as the new policies are concerned. Challenges. What I feel the challenges, which most of the speakers have said, is that we are a poor country. It's about 3% or so is the GDP allocation as far as our education expenditure is concerned. As per the new education policy, I think they think of spending about 6%. Whether it is feasible or not, let's wait. So funding is the major problem as far as we are concerned. This funding to a major extent has been offset by involving the private entrepreneurs as far as the educationalists. And it has, as Professor Padwala said, it has, Dr. Job also said, it's got its own both ways of it. You can have good quality, but then good government control is the answer, I think. Then there has to be a match between the aspiration, as I've said, of parents and the skills of their ones. That's what is the real requirement. And these are these policies, and how earnestly they are being will be implemented. It's giving a time horizon about 10 to 15 years. So I feel this is a good policy. We have to go into the nitty-gritties of the execution, and the time will be there. And there was a course correction required. They have been correctly identified, and I feel that this we can put in place. Back to the control, please. Thank you.
Hello. Yes, thanks, Brigadier Nair, for that informative views on this higher education system. Now we are going to towards the end of the discussion, and we would like to actually look at the how how we can implement this policy. As Professor Padwal has said, this is a statement of basically intent. Dr. Anish Pillai.
Hello. Sir, it was not audible. In between, there were some connection problem. I couldn't hear you. What you said at the end. Hello.
We can hear you, Sri Kumar.
What is the way forward to implement this policy? What are the bottlenecks and basically this is an intent. So they need to actually take this forward. The government needs to take this forward. So what is the next step?
So I will make my points in this regard. See, though this policy, in fact, we had a discussion 1 year back when it was a 488 document. Now it is only 66 page document. Now this document or this policy wants to achieve its purpose by 2035. That is what the timeline they had given. Though it is aiming at 2035, but still immediately we have to do certain things. Then only we can achieve the real benefit of this policy. In that regard, one of the most important thing is conversion of existing higher education system, like where those institutions which is having less than 3,000 students, they should be merged with another higher education system. And I feel that's a very, very wonderful thing, and that has to be done at the earliest. One example I will tell you why I am saying this. Recently, I had a talk with one of my cousins. She is doing biotechnology, MSc biotechnology in a private aided college. Now, what is happening? They had a final year project as a part of their course, and their institute has suggested her to go and do this project, finding out some biotechnology lab in Kerala or anywhere where they want to do. Now, why they suggested that? The reason is that particular college doesn't have the facility to do so, or they don't have the capacity to facilitate a project work of their own students. Now, that shows there are institutions in our country which does not have the basic capacity to cater the needs of the students studying there. I'm talking about higher education system here. Now, if such type of institutions are merged with bigger institutions, we can ensure some sort of quality and some sort of catering the needs of the interest that is there. So that has to be done wherever there small institutions are there, they should be merged with higher, bigger capacity oriented institutions. That is one important thing. Second thing is incorporation of vocational education as our policy visualizes skill-oriented or industry-based skill-oriented education. So we have to have vocational education, or our curriculum we need to restructure, giving more emphasis to the vocational education. And for that, we have to have some sort of capacity building programs, especially with respect to teachers, as well as with respect to the administrators of the relevant colleges. Why I am saying administrators of the relevant colleges? Most of the situation, they may be interested in uplifting the college in one point or other way. But in that level, they may forget about the vocational aspects, or they may forget about the future of the students. I'm not talking about each and every administrators, but some of them at least. In such situation, there should be a capacity oriented or a capacity building program, focusing or including administrators also. That will provide the entire benefit, that will give a benefit to the institution as such. That is another thing. Then the next important thing we need to focus on allowing foreign institutions. Now our policy wants, or policy allows, top 100 institutions. So top ranked 100 institutions from foreign countries can come to India. Now, we don't know to what extent these top institutions are interested in coming over India. Though we have a very good brains in India, but still I'm a little bit apprehensive about the approach of these top 100 institutions. Now, instead of fixing that top 100, if you allow little bit flexibility there, I can tell you definitely some foreign institutions will come into our country, and that will be really beneficial for the higher education sector in our country. Then another important thing is flexibility of exit and exiting and going out and coming in. And there are so many situations or so many reasons in which higher education students or students from higher education sector, they may leave the course. And even after leaving that, they will be given a chance to come back. after solving their problems. That is a good thing for our institution and for this policy. And that type of practically that option should be made available in our higher education system. Again, interdisciplinary electives or interdisciplinary courses in undergraduate level. Our curriculum should be restructured in such a way so that the students will be able to opt out the relevant subjects or subjects of their choice. Though they are studying a particular stream, they should be allowed to opt. And that way, our curriculum should be restructured. I think these are the important things we need to do immediately for the implementation of this particular policy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Anish Pillai, for those remarks. We are running short of time and we need to get some quick responses about how to go forward. Actually, a lot of innovations are suggested in the higher education sector. Even that transferring of credit, there is a what you call credit bank, academic credit bank, or so many new initiatives are being planned. So how these will be implemented, and of course this multiple entry and exit options, how those can be what do you call integrated in the new system, the functioning of the HECI, which will have 4 verticals. I think these will be some of the major concern areas as we go forward. Any quick remarks on this? Philip, you want? Philip. Yes, Philip Dan.
Thank you, Sri Kumar and the rest of the team. It was definitely a very interesting subject to see all the educationals talking about education. So I am not an I'm involved in education, but I will try to give this feedback from a corporate point of view, because finally all the people whom you are churning out from the institutions come to the corporates, and we need to see how this education policy would help the corporates, both private corporations as well as the government corporations. One of the good things which we have seen here is that the new education policy has taken the best practices of all the universities worldwide. So I've been studying this. It is not only something what we have picked up from India uniquely. If you see every one of these particular things which are written in the new education policy is not unique to India alone. It is the best practices in many countries worldwide, and they have picked all the best practices and put together, which I think is a very positive thing to do. The other thing is very important is to see that you have allocated a good percentage of your country's GDP to this, which is 6%. And if we are looking at that from actual numbers, you're talking in terms of something like $260 billion, which is a hell of a lot of money. Now, having said these two things, now we are going to come down and see how practical this is to take it forward, and how should we need to take it forward. As a vision document, I think it is excellent, because it's a global, it's an education policy of a global standard. It's not just looking at India, it's a global standard education policy. But then we need to see how we need to take this particular things forward from, we are spending only 1.7% of our GDP to straight away 6%. Do we have the money? And if we are going to have it, how are we going to go in? Do we go by that? Do we have a step-by-step plan? Because many times we have seen in the governments, not only this government, many governments come down and make big bang announcements. Announcements are very good, but how to take these announcements forward in a step-by-step. So I think there is a need to have all these policies which have put down a clear roadmap on a year-by-year, step-by-step for the next 5 to 10 years to see how this is implemented and what are the things required to implement this, starting from the teachers' education, infrastructure for the universities. So all these things are very, and even skilling the teachers to do that. So while a policy document is great, but seeing that the policy document comes to something which can be practical is a very important thing. I think the devil is in the details in that. The other aspects which I've been talking, many of them have talked about our culture policy, which is all very good. But one thing I think we need to understand very clearly as a person who's who's traveled very widely and who has been interacting with international organizations and many, many countries, is that English is not an Englishman's language anymore. English is not an Englishman's language. Let us sometimes not decry that. English is a global international language. So if we want to move forward, we should not at any point of time bring this down. And if you see as a person from the corporate life, why is it that people from India have been successful worldwide? Is because we have the advantage, more of Indians have got the advantage of knowing English as compared to even other countries, maybe like Germans or French or people talk about Chinese and Japanese, etc. They take one more step more than us. So we have certain advantages. We should not give that advantages away. So knowing of English as an advantage is something which we need to keep, and then build on that with other things which we need. Not throw this away and say that we'll start off with mother tongue alone. Well, the other aspect is mother tongue. What is a mother tongue? We have so many languages here, and many of people, if you see, especially in the urban areas, are mixed families, people living in different places. If a person from Kerala goes to a family, moves from here to Bombay, what would the mother tongue be? After 3 years, the father is transferred to another place, maybe to Delhi. What would the mother tongue be? So we need to be very clearly, we should disconnect emotions with practicality when we bring these particular things into practice. So what I wanted to mention very clearly is, I don't want to take too much of time, is to see that the document is wonderful. It has taken the best practices of everything in the world. We need to have a roadmap to take it forward if you want it, both in terms of what is required at every stage, where are we going to get the money, and the other thing is build on what we already have. Don't throw away the strengths which we have. We have strengths which we have, we should build on it. We as Indians are very much better than even others, Chinese or Japanese or Koreans, in terms of language and numbers. Indians are very good numbers and language, and the very fact that most of the STEM subjects, science, technology, economic, education and maths, engineering and maths are in English, we should also that would also help our students to have a wider area to study from. So having said that, I don't want to dwell too much of time because a lot of time has been taken by everybody. All I wanted to mention was that while it's a great document, we need to see how the steps which we are going to go forward with, and then also see to it that the implementation is done properly and build on our strengths and not throw away what we already have. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Philip Daniel, for those very, very inspiring words about this new education policy. In fact, there is a lot of criticism floating around, and with your experience abroad and so much, experience with other countries, you have been able to give a very good insight about this policy. So we have some more time, very quick, before we wind up. Basically, the panel was of the view that the policy intent is really good. There is no doubt about it. And the Indian as a nation needs, we are at least 20 years back in our pedagogy, whether it is at school or early learning or higher education level. So by the time we implement this in another 20 years time, should we be back further back by another 20 years? So we need to, I think, go a little bit fast forward. Any other comments on this implementation, this roadmap? I think we can take 1 or 2 quick comments. Anyone? Shall I call names? Father Saji Philip, I see Saji Philip. Anybody would like to have share their thoughts on how to take this forward. Yes, Father Loyola, Anthony.
Yes, sir.
Yes, yeah.
Looking at this national education policy, which speaks so high about implementation and all the giving us a lot of flexibility about doing a lot of innovations. Personally, what I feel is that in spite of all the good intentions of the government and all the policymakers and all the good and the very, very important views being shared by our eminent speakers here, what I feel more important is that we need to motivate our teachers in a practical sense. Even if the government is bringing a kind of act and all this policy, even if we have very, very the teachers with good qualification, but if they are not motivated, if they are doing only for money's sake, I don't think we'll be able to implement. And as you have rightly said, we'll be still 20 years behind. I'm talking from my experience. How much time do I take to motivate my teachers? That's very, very important. So as educational leaders, what we need to give more importance is to motivate those who are actually implementing that in all our schools and colleges and universities. Most of the time we try to fulfill what is demanded of us. And most of the times we might even do it for the sake of a good result oriented. And as Sir Philip Daniel was talking about the corporate world, they are just waiting to get a good bunch of people who can be of useful to them. At the same time, what is more important is that we really motivate our teachers, that they feel the need to develop our country, our nation, our state, our place, be it whomever we are catering, that we have a real love for the humanity, for the society, for the children who are under our care. And I think if we have that sort of right perspective and motivation, I think we'll be able to implement all this policy that the government is very, very sincerely trying to bring forward. And as Sir Philip Daniel was talking about, this policy has been made taking into account all the good policies of different universities worldwide. And instead of looking at negatively, we should always look forward positively how we can implement this, that to the best of our facilities or the things that we have at our disposal. And I think if each one of us can look at it very, very positively and try to give my best, and I'm sure definitely we can go forward to implement this policy in a greater way.
So that is very encouraging words from a very innovator from a rural place. You are actually a big inspiration for us all. So those words are also inspiring, and what you said is very true. We need good quality teachers. Teachers are at the heart of the system, not the infrastructure. So I think the most important stakeholder is the teacher, and there are a lot of areas that the new education policy talks about to improve the quality. So I think that will be addressed very soon, all the concerns. So let's hope that this policy will be a game changer and take the country forward. We are really grateful for the all the participants who have been with us for the last 2 hours. And you are still free to send your suggestions or recommendations or whatever your thoughts on the things that we have discussed to editor@rajagirimedia.com. I think that screen will also be shared at the end. So once again, I thank you all and have a great evening. Thanks you.